A black female pilot was denied her rightful first-class seat moments before duty, simply because she wasn't believable out of uniform. A gate agent bowed to pressure from elite passengers and a flawed system that mislabeled her as less than she was. But when Captain Maya Brooks quietly laid her gold wings on the counter, the entire terminal stopped and listened. And just wait until you hear how one moment rewrote the rules and restored justice at 35,000 feet. The pre-dawn hum of JFK buzzed with the familiar rhythm of movement. Rolling suitcases, boarding calls, groggy business travelers clutching overpriced coffee. For most, it was just another Monday. For Captain Maya Brooks, it was a layover day with a uniform folded neatly in her carry-on and a confirmed seat waiting in first class. She moved through the crowd with the practiced composure of someone who'd flown through storms darker than night and wind shears sharp enough to cut steel. In jeans and a navy blazer, with nothing flashy to mark her authority, she didn't look like someone who held command over a 100-ton aircraft. And yet, she did, every day. Her captain's wings were tucked safely inside her wallet, not pinned to her chest, because this wasn't a flight she was flying, not yet. She was deadheading, industry slang for when flight crew are repositioned to another city for duty. Her next assignment was out of Denver in just a few hours, and crew scheduling had booked her a seat in first class to ensure she arrived rested. It wasn't a perk, it was policy, part of the airline's fatigue mitigation program designed to protect passengers, aircraft, and the people trusted to fly them. She reached the gate a little early, scanned a monitor out of habit, and stepped up to the counter, boarding pass in hand. Behind the desk stood a woman named Linda Carver, mid-40s, brisk, overworked. Her fingers tapped across the keyboard with the urgency of someone who didn't have time to explain anything twice. Her nameplate gleamed. Her eyes did not. Without looking up, Linda spoke with mechanical efficiency. "Ms. Brooks, we're moving you to economy, operational necessity." No greeting, no explanation, just a casual redirection of a flight crew member minutes away from becoming responsible for the lives of over 100 passengers. Maya blinked, stunned by the bluntness. Sorry? Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Linda finally glanced up, briefly. "We're oversold in first class," she repeated, this time with a tighter smile. "You'll be reseated in economy, 23B, middle seat." The words landed with a thud, quick, sterile, and absolute. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The authority in her tone was quiet but unmistakable, the kind of tone that settled cockpits and calmed turbulence. "I'm deadheading on a fatigue mitigation seat," she said, carefully. "I'm scheduled to command Flight 701 to Seattle this afternoon. If I arrive unrested, I'm legally grounded." Linda's smile didn't falter, but her posture hardened. She'd had a long week already, delays, double bookings, and 3 passengers threatened to file complaints just in the past 2 days. Every deviation she approved meant follow-up, write-ups, possibly a conversation with a supervisor who never spent 5 minutes behind a gate desk. She wasn't going to take another hit today. Not for this. "The manifest is locked," she replied. "Upgrade list cleared. We had to make room. You'll be fine in the back." From behind Maya, someone shifted, a tall man in a sharp silver suit, AirPods in, passport out, waiting just close enough to hear. The kind of frequent flyer who thought boarding priority was a measure of worth. He leaned slightly forward, scanning Maya from head to toe, subtly but not discreetly. A glance that didn't ask, "Who is this person?" but "Why is she in my way?" Maya felt it immediately, the shift in energy, the unspoken challenge, the expectation that she'd quietly step aside. "I'm not a standby passenger," she said, a little more clipped now. This was a confirmed assignment seat, first class per scheduling. Linda's fingers returned to the keyboard with the energy of someone pretending to check, already knowing the answer she was going to give. The screen flickered, her brow barely twitched. "System shows you as NRSA," she said, "non-revenue, space available." "That's a system error," Maya replied. "It's confirmed travel for duty." Linda gave a small shrug, the kind that absolved her of responsibility without saying the words. Sometimes the system flags it wrong, but we had to accommodate elite status passengers. We can't bump them once it's cleared. You'll still get there. There it was, not even subtle. Someone more important wanted the seat, and Maya, who didn't fit the mold, was easier to bump. The man in the silver suit edged closer, his suitcase gliding smoothly forward. His smirk wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. The air changed around them. People began to notice, heads turned. Maya stood upright, taller somehow despite the fatigue pressing behind her eyes. But it wasn't the seat that hurt. It was the dismissal, the way Linda's eyes paused just a second too long, as if trying to place her, as if doubting that someone who looked like Maya could actually be who her ticket said she was. It was a look Maya had seen before, not often, but always enough to remember it. A silent question not of her credentials, but of her credibility. Not in uniform, not believable. Not old, not credible. Not white, not trusted. She didn't say any of that. She'd learned long ago that silence could sometimes be sharper than protest. But inside, something cracked. The unfairness of it hit like a sudden pocket of turbulence, not violent but jarring, unexpected, and hard to ignore once you'd felt it. Still, she stayed composed, because captains don't lose control in public, not even when they're being quietly pushed out of their own seat by someone who didn't earn it. Especially not then. And so she stood, ticket in hand, calm on the surface, but with a storm forming behind her eyes. And this time, she wasn't going to sit quietly in 23B and let it pass. Maya stepped back from the gate counter, her boarding pass still clutched loosely in her hand. She didn't want to make a scene, not yet, but her breath came shallow, her pulse loud in her ears. Her phone was already in her hand before she realized it, fingers dialing crew scheduling like muscle memory. The line rang and she was placed on hold with the familiar soft music that had the uncanny ability to make time feel slower than it really was. She glanced up at the gate clock. T-5 hours until she'd be in uniform, in the left seat of a 737, preparing to take off from Denver. She needed rest. Not comfort, not convenience, but actual physiological recovery. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about not falling asleep at 30,000 feet. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan Park, the first officer she was scheduled to fly with later today. "You good? We push in 5 hours. Please rest." She didn't reply. Not yet, because she didn't know if she was good. And the longer she stood here, fighting for what should have never been in question, the less likely that rest became. Behind the counter, Linda tapped furiously at her terminal, frowning at lines of code and screens designed more for speed than nuance. The system had flagged Maya as NRSA, non-revenue, space available, which wasn't just a technicality. It was a digital mislabeling with real-world consequences. That one wrong tag had turned a confirmed operational seat into a favor, one she was being denied. Linda sighed, flipping through a thick policy manual, eyes darting across regulations she barely had time to remember. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she scrolled. This wasn't personal, not to her. It was survival. Her supervisor had warned her more than once. No more exceptions, no more errors. She was a gate agent on thin ice. One override too many, and her job was on the line. She hadn't meant to be unfair. She just didn't see another option that wouldn't lead to another reprimand. As Linda worked, Maya tried to center herself. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders drawn. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, to wait for the call to connect to someone who could fix this. And then a tug at her blazer. She turned to see a boy, maybe 7 or 8, beaming up at her with a wide, gap-toothed smile. His eyes sparkled with the kind of curiosity that adults sometimes lose on the other side of TSA. Behind him stood his grandmother, a tall woman with salt and pepper hair and the quiet grace of someone who'd seen much and carried more. "I'm so sorry," she said gently. He thinks you're a pilot." Maya blinked. "I am," she said softly. The boy's face lit up. "You fly the big ones?" Maya crouched down to meet him eye to eye. She was still tired, still tense, but something in this child's expression disarmed her. "I do," she said, And let me tell you a secret. The safest place in the sky? It's behind a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. Jaden, his name stitched in blocky letters on his backpack, nodded, as if filing that information away like an important instruction. Behind them, the grandmother gave Maya a look, not just a smile, a knowing, warm thank you look. One that said, he needed to see this. I needed to see this. And somehow, so did Maya. Her phone clicked. A voice finally came through. Crew scheduling. She gave her employee number, flight details, and the situation. The agent on the other end confirmed it quickly. Yes, she was assigned a confirmed first-class seat. Yes, fatigue mitigation applied. Yes, this shouldn't have happened. But then, another pause. "Let me talk to ops," the agent said. "Don't go anywhere." She stayed on hold. At the counter, the silver-suited passenger stepped closer, clearly watching the interaction with growing impatience. He leaned just slightly toward Linda, lowering his voice to a coaxing whisper. "I'm Global Platinum. Don't make this hard." Linda didn't look at him right away. She kept typing, but her jaw clenched and her hand paused before confirming the boarding group list. "We're just following policy," she replied after a moment, more to himself than to him. But which policy? The one Maya was thinking about was printed in the pilot fatigue manual, reinforced in annual training, and built into the very foundation of aviation safety. Linda was thinking about a different policy, the kind that lived in emails from corporate, bullet point checklists, and verbal warnings from middle managers. Maya and Linda weren't just two women on opposite sides of a gate desk. They were representatives of two systems, one built to protect people, and one built to prioritize efficiency, even if it meant losing sight of the people entirely. Both were under pressure. Both were tired. Only one had wings. And only one would be expected to stay calm at 35,000 feet if things went wrong. And the clock was still ticking. The announcement chimed through the concourse with clinical indifference. "Final boarding for Flight 2431 to Denver. All passengers should now be on board." The sound echoed like a closing door. Maya's jaw clenched. She could already feel the checklist rotating in her mind, like a sequence she could almost recite in her sleep. Verify fuel load, check weather reports, brief with the FO, set altitude bugs, ensure crew readiness. All standard, all critical. But every one of those tasks demanded clarity, energy, focus. And instead, she was standing here, arguing for a seat that wasn't a privilege, but a safeguard. Maya stepped back to the podium, the weariness now sharpened by something else, a line that had been crossed. She had been calm, patient, procedural. But the line between a simple mistake and something deeper, something systemic, had been crossed too many times in silence. Not today. Linda saw her returning and looked up, not surprised. "Ma'am," she said, already preemptively firm, "we're closing the door. It's economy or we rebook you." Her voice was clipped now, as if speaking to someone being unreasonably difficult. The words landed like an ultimatum. Maya exhaled slowly. And then the edge of her voice changed, not louder, but unmistakably steadier. "You're asking me," Maya said, her tone calm as a level horizon, "to show up to command an aircraft after spending 3 hours wedged in an upright seat between two strangers, so someone with a loyalty status can sip orange juice in a glass and stretch their legs?" She didn't wait for a response. Instead, she placed her phone on the podium, screen up, speakerphone on. A soft click, then a voice came through. A crew scheduling rep confirming exactly what she'd said from the beginning. "Yes, Captain Brooks is scheduled to operate Flight 701 this afternoon. She's assigned first class under fatigue medication. That booking is non-negotiable per FAA rest requirements." Linda's fingers hovered above the keyboard, frozen. But before anyone could respond, the man in the silver suit stepped forward, arms crossed, eyebrows raised in theatrical skepticism. "If you're actually a pilot," he said, just loud enough to be heard by those nearby, "where's your uniform?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Maya didn't blink. She didn't need a costume to validate who she was. She reached calmly into her bag, pulled out a small leather wallet, and flipped it open on the counter. Inside, a set of gleaming gold captain's wings. She placed them on the podium with quiet finality. No explanation, no ceremony. Just truth laid bare. The light caught the polished edges of the wings, reflecting upward like a flare, catching eyes across the gate. The room shifted. Not suddenly, but perceptibly, like gravity had reoriented. A ripple of murmurs passed through the surrounding passengers. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Even those who weren't paying attention now were. Near the waiting area, young Jaden's eyes went wide, his mouth parting slightly in awe. He tugged his grandmother's sleeve. Ruth, seated beside him, looked on with a slow, knowing nod, a quiet, powerful gesture of recognition. The wings weren't decoration. They were a command. They weren't given. They were earned. Linda stared at them as if the entire room had just rearranged itself. In a way, it had. And yet the tension in her face hadn't vanished. She was torn, between a screen blinking oversold and a truth now gleaming in front of her. Before she could decide what to do, another figure stepped forward behind the counter. Tom Delgado, operations manager for the gate division, tall, even-keeled, carrying a tablet and the kind of authority that makes people lower their voices when he walks by. "What's the issue?" he asked, his voice neutral but direct. Linda straightened immediately. System flagged her as non-rev. "We're over on first. He," she nodded toward the man in the silver suit, "is global platinum." Tom's eyes moved with precision, from the silver suit, to the wings, to Maya's face. "Captain Brooks," he said, measured, "you're deadheading to operate 701 out of Denver." "Yes," Maya replied, "and I need to arrive rested." There was no drama in her words, no apology, only clarity. Tom gave a small nod, as if doing a mental audit of policies and priorities. He knew the policy. Everyone here did. But policy and practice didn't always follow the same flight path. "Policy says," Linda began, half an argument forming. "Safety says," Maya interjected, not raising her voice, but cutting clean through the noise, "that when a captain tells you fatigue risk is in play, you mitigate. You don't gamble the next flight on optics and loyalty points." Silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Her voice was steady, her posture unshaken. She didn't need to threaten, plead, or escalate. The wings did the talking. And the truth behind them was louder than anything else in the terminal. This wasn't about a seat. It was about the principle that the safety of passengers starts long before a plane leaves the ground. And today, someone finally said it. For a second, the gate held its breath. No movement, no voices, just a suspended moment where everyone seemed to register what had just happened. The wings, the call from scheduling, the stillness in Maya's stance. Something unspoken had shifted. And then it came. From row 2, Ruth's voice, firm, clear, unwavering. "Give the pilot her seat." It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that cut through years of being dismissed, ignored, spoken over, and now refused to stay quiet. Heads turned, conversation stilled. One by one, others found their voices. A man near the boarding lane murmured, "She's right." A woman in Group 1 nodded. "This isn't even a debate." Another passenger pulled out her phone, not to film, but to document, just in case this went the wrong way. And then a voice from the back, this one deeper, familiar in its cadence. A tall man in a navy blazer stepped forward. A pilot, from a different airline, judging by his insignia, but unmistakably part of the same fraternity. His tone was calm, authoritative, and absolute. "Captain's wings trump status," he said simply. It's that simple. In the midst of it all, the man in the silver suit stiffened. His face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from entitlement being interrupted. "I paid for," he began, voice sharp, but it didn't finish. Tom Delgado stepped forward before the tension could rise again. His tone was the one every good operations manager learns: calm, direct, not to be argued with. Not because it's loud, but because it's final. "Sir, you'll still be in first," he said evenly. "We're resolving a misclassification. You're not losing your seat. You're just not taking someone else's by mistake." He turned to Linda. Quiet, measured. "Override it." Linda didn't move. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as if it might shock her. Her mind raced with what she knew would follow. The override log, the write-up, maybe another call from a supervisor asking her to justify the exception. And yet, she looked up, looked at Maya, at the wings resting on the counter like a truth no one could deny. And then her eyes found Jaden. He stood just behind the rope divider, leaning on his grandmother's arm, eyes wide and hopeful, watching her, the gate agent, as if the entire world of aviation was about to be decided by what she typed next. He wasn't waiting for a boarding announcement. He was waiting to see if this system could be fair. Maya saw Linda's hesitation and softened, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. She knew this wasn't just about a seat. It was about pressure, protocol, consequences that rolled downhill. So she spoke, not with fire, but with clarity. "I know you've got 100 rules and one of you," she said gently, but with weight. "But I've got 100 souls later today, and only one of me." Something in the words, the math of responsibility, landed where policy couldn't. Linda exhaled. Her hands moved, deliberate. The override was typed. A screen blinked. A seat unlocked. She reached for the printer, pulled the new boarding pass, and slid it across the counter. "Captain Brooks," she said, voice lower now, a little steadier, 1A. It was more than a seat. It was a correction, not of a booking error, but of a narrative. The one where a black woman in civilian clothes has to prove she belongs in the cockpit. A small ripple of applause rustled through the cabin. Not loud, but real. The kind that starts not in hands, but in hearts. Jaden pumped his fist like it was the last scene in a movie. His grandmother's smile said it all. And then, something unexpected. The man in the silver suit looked at Maya, then at the wing still on the counter. His jaw tightened, but this time he didn't speak. Instead, he shifted his bag back, stepped to the side, and made room. He didn't smile, he didn't apologize, but he also didn't resist. And sometimes, progress looks like the absence of one more no. Maya stepped forward and scanned her boarding pass. Tom leaned in just before she crossed the threshold. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "we'll fix the crew tag in your profile, and I'll file the note on fatigue seating. This shouldn't have happened." Maya met his eyes and nodded. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. Because systems are made of people, and people, if they listen, if they act, can remake them. A few hours later, the early morning light crept across the Denver tarmac like a slow curtain rising on a new stage. The first sunbeam kissed the metal skin of Flight 701, giving it a dull, golden glow as the airport buzzed into its daily rhythm. Ground crews moved like clockwork, refueling, loading, checking, everyone doing their part to get the jet off the ground. Captain Maya Brooks walked toward the aircraft in full uniform now, navy blazer pressed sharp, slacks tailored, hat tucked under her arm. She was no longer the anonymous woman in civilian clothes trying to defend her place in a system that had forgotten its own values. She looked exactly like what she was, the one in charge. Her first officer, Ethan Park, stood at the jetway entrance holding 2 cups of coffee and a grin that barely disguised his relief. "You look rested," he said. Maya smiled as she took the cup. "I am," she replied, clipping her wings onto her jacket where they belonged. "Let's go earn the trust they gave us." They stepped into the cockpit together. For Maya, it was more than a return to duty. It was a return to self, to the space where clarity lived, where training ruled, where no one questioned whether she belonged. The aircraft taxied, engines humming like a heartbeat beneath their feet. The checklist flowed easily between them, clean, efficient, focused. And then, with a soft rotation and a rising hum, the jet lifted off the runway and climbed smoothly into the high blue air above the Rockies. At 32,000 feet, as they leveled off and the city fell behind like a memory, Maya stared out at the horizon. She let her hands rest lightly on the controls, the familiar vibration of the aircraft wrapping around her like armor and affirmation. Her thoughts drifted, not to the numbers on the panel or the altitude tape, but to the people she'd left back at the gate. She thought about Linda, the gate agent whose hands had trembled as much from pressure and from policy. Maya didn't feel anger anymore, only clarity. Fear turns into rigidity, and rigidity, when left unchecked, turns into harm. But when someone blinks first, when someone listens, something shifts. That shift had started yesterday. She thought about Jaden, row 10C, the boy with the paper wings and the wide eyes. He had peeked past his grandmother to watch the clouds through the oval window, pressing his hands to the glass like it was the edge of another world. Because for him, it was. And maybe now, thanks to a seat, a voice, a moment, that world felt just a little closer. She thought about Silversuit, the frequent flyer who didn't smile, didn't apologize, but didn't stand in the way when it counted. Sometimes growth isn't loud. It's just the absence of one more obstacle. That's enough too. And she thought about Tom Delgado, the ops manager who didn't hesitate, who saw wings and understood what they meant, not just in metal and thread, but in responsibility. He'd promised to fix the error, and unlike most promises made in a rush at a gate, this one had already landed. Later that week, a memo quietly circulated through the airline's internal system. It clarified, in clear, equivocal terms, that crew booked for duty under fatigue mitigation could not be downgraded. Not for operational convenience, not for customer status, not again. Tom sent Maya a screenshot of the memo with a simple line beneath it. "Thanks for the nudge." She smiled when she saw it. Somewhere else in the system, Linda, now off shift and back home, found herself replaying the moment those captain's wings hit the counter. Something inside her had shifted that day, even if she hadn't realized it then. Since that moment, she'd caught herself doing things a little differently. A pause before assuming, a question before denying, a softer tone when speaking to someone who didn't look the part. Not because of guilt, but because something small but human had been restored. Perspective. And Jaden? He wore a pair of gold paper wings taped to his hoodie the next day at school. Told his whole class he met a real-life captain, and that pilots look like anyone, if you've got the focus to fly. He left out the part where she had to fight for her seat. He didn't need to know that yet. What he remembered was that she flew. And Ruth, standing behind him at school pickup, simply added, "and like someone who knows when to stand up." Back in the cockpit, cruising above the clouds, Maya reached up and lightly touched the metal wings pinned to her chest. They were warm now, not just from the cabin air, but from everything they had meant in the last 24 hours. Anger had gotten her to the counter, but action had carried her through it. And action, when done right, becomes change. What happened at the gate wasn't erased, but it no longer owned her. It was part of her story, a flawed page in a flight log that led to something better. A policy corrected, A gate agent's mindset adjusted. A little boy's idea of who could fly widened. The sky didn't keep score, but people did. And this time, when fairness asked to board, someone opened a lane.